Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be reviewing the fourth studio album by American Trinidadian rapper Nicki Minaj. This album is titled Queen and it was released this past Friday, the 10th of August, 2018. This album was heavily anticipated and was pushed back, well, one time significantly, but was almost pushed back twice to next week because there was a certain sample on a track, Barbie Dreams, that was not fully cleared by the time the album was approaching its initial release, and so Nicki was trying to figure out whether she was going to scrap the track and just release the album on the original date, the 10th, or push it back one more week. I am really glad she did not push it back, as we do have another big album coming out this Friday, Ariana Grande's album, which they are both featured on each other's albums, and as sisters in music, I would love to see them not necessarily try and distract one another from one another by releasing on the same day. I think it was really good and also important that Nicki kept her initial promise of releasing the album on the day she did, as she was originally going to be released in June, but got pushed back. Now, I will preface this review by saying that, as you probably will know on this channel, I am not the hugest hip-hop fan. I don't review a lot of hip-hop on this channel. I have reviewed Nicki Minaj, however, once on this channel. I have reviewed the Pink Print album, and I had a lot of positive things to say about it, as that album really did surprise me. As prior to that release, I had not really been a big Nicki Minaj fan. Just like any other hip-hop artist, I was a little bit weary of getting into their music, and I found some of it very derivative, or I found some of it very silly, or just not my style, more importantly. And I did feel like at one point, like I would never cover Nicki on this channel, but then I was like, you know what, let me just review the Pink Print, because I had so much to say. And I'm glad I did. And now with Queen, I was really kind of concerned. I was like, is this going to top the Pink Print for me? Is this album going to reinstill my interest in Nicki Minaj? Or am I going to start to realize maybe I shouldn't have been hyping this up so much in my head? I was really worried and expecting, to be honest, a bit of a letdown. But boy, can I safely say, now that I've listened to it several times, that I do think it was worth the wait. It was worth the hype, for the most part. Is this album better than the Pink Print? It's hard, time will tell. There was something very iconic about the Pink Print. And there was something that was a lot more pop about the Pink Print. It's kind of interesting. She talked about in the run-up to the release of that album how it was going to be straight-up hip-hop. Roman Reloaded was very much pop music. And her first album had a lot of that as well. And she wanted to be treated like a real rapper, like a heavyweight, She wanted to be like the next Jay-Z, so that's why she named the album Pink Print, off of his album The Blueprint. But it's actually kind of ironic because I think Queen is probably her most straight-up hip-hop record to date, and I think it makes the Pink Print look quite popish. And that's not a bad thing in my opinion. To many hip-hop fans, it might be. I know a lot of people are hit or miss with her singing ability. And there is not nearly as much singing on this record as there was on the Pink Print. So people who want straight up, clever, witty, fast delivered, lots of switch ups, lots of really interesting flows, and a lot of jabs at current topics in society, I think they'll be pretty impressed with this album because that's really what she was going for. I mean, she was not holding any bars back in terms of what she was spitting. Now, like I said, I am not a hip-hop fan to begin with, but I will say this, I do prefer female-driven hip-hop. I have covered MIA on this channel. I've talked about Azealia Banks. I definitely have an interest in female rap versus male rap, and I've been trying to figure out what it is about female rap that I'm more drawn to than male-driven rap. And I think it all does come down to the fact that, and especially in Nicki's case, there's something about Nicki's delivery that I find very theatrical and interesting. She is an artist who constantly is changing up her persona and constantly trying to flip the script a little bit in the way she delivers her rap. So she's not the first female artist to do this with rapping. But she's one of the most notable in the current climate that Nicki's raps are interesting to listen to. I can't really get around saying that. The way male rap is often delivered, it's very, I don't want to say monotone, but it often comes across very monotone. There is, unfortunately, a very discouraging trend in the SoundCloud rapper scene of mumble rap, where these male rappers are trying to sound as inaudible as possible, as they don't really enunciate and they don't really change their tone in their voice. It's very and I noticed that, especially on like an artist like Future, who is featured on this record. You see that comparison. Future is just so unanimated compared to Nicki. And that's the real key word, is animation. Nicki always comes across as this sometimes very cartoonish figure, but you know what? At least she's animated. She is full of that energy, and that energy is infectious. She really feels or pours into any kind of emotion that needs to be there in terms of lyric that's supposed to be emotional. And then when she wants to have fun, she really knows how to make the lyrics fun. She knows how to make them a bit silly. And I think the fact that she almost is not afraid to make fun of herself in doing the weird voices and everything, I think that's a tribute to her talent. And as she constantly talks about, pushing her pen and always how she writes her own raps, she really does have a talent for writing. And I think the fact that Eminem is featured on this record, if I will say anything, Nicki talked about in an interview how she really just wanted this album to celebrate like the talent that is rap, rhythm, and poetry, and how some people are just really good at writing and spitting at a really fast delivery. Eminem is definitely another big rapper who has that skill, and I will give him that credit. Now, I'm not an Eminem fan. I find his music to be very aggressive. Sometimes I find some of his lyrics to be a bit problematic for my taste. So I'm not really into his music. But Eminem's feature is important because she wanted to showcase what real rapping is, and I do think Eminem truly delivers. And of course, I'm talking about the track Majesty. Let's go down the track list because I'm getting very sporadic here. Let's open up with Ganja Burns. Now, this is really interesting because Nicki, as many of us will probably realize, has been working on this album for months. Even when this album was announced to be released, it was still not finished, as we all thought. And she was tinkering with this album up until 3 hours before she went on Zane Lowe for Queen Radio on Apple. And she finally admitted, I just finished this album 3 hours ago. And can you imagine just like all the all-nighters, all the last-minute insane tinkering she was probably doing to this record? I mean, it is 19 songs. It's not nothing. But and of course we didn't know if the album was actually coming at that point. And if she finally confirmed it was coming just a little bit later than the midnight mark, it was coming 12 hours later. And she's now been tweeting how she feels like this album is incomplete, particularly with Ganja Burns. She tweeted that I want to go back and I want to shift up the tone of the chorus and the hook. She feels like it's too soft. I'm like, what can you really do? Unless you're going to re-release the record, we all have it already. I mean, you can't really change anything. So it's just, and she said she was so sleep deprived that she wrote Ganja Burns with an S instead of Ganja Burn, which is actually what she meant with the title. We'd heard that title for a while, and I was a little bit like, Burns with an S, does that really make much sense? It doesn't really matter, and you of course can edit that easily. But Ganja Burns, all of that aside, sounds phenomenal, and it is my favorite track on this record. When we heard it as the opener, when the instrumental started, I just got this really good feeling. There is something so captivating about the energy of this song, and she just released the beautiful music video, which actually features the album cover photo shoot within the video, where she is dressed in this very iconic Egyptian regalia on a tree, which is, I think, quite an iconic album cover. It is very regal and sensual, and I think that's something that embodies the idea of this record beautifully. And this album is about solidifying herself as a queen. And although she is always going to be sexual in that way and sensual in that way, there's something actually, I don't want to say conservative, but there is something actually quite mature about the way she is exposing herself on this album cover. It's a very self-assured, powerful female stance. And there's something a little bit more elevated than just like, I'm going to show, my body. And so it doesn't come across to me as so narcissistic. It's sort of more of a just, yes, I might be desirable, but I am also a woman, and I am going to be very, I'm going to show my femininity. I'm going to expose myself, but not too much. And of course, I am looking to the distance. I'm looking over my kingdom. I do think Queen is a quite simple album name. I actually think Queen Kong would have been a great title for this record, as she talks about King Kong in Chun-Li. And the idea of flipping the script from King to Queen Kong, I thought that would have been a really cool, the beat my chest sort of imagery. Queen is just sort of like one word, very basic. I don't know if that's a great album title, but if anything, it does just get the point across, is that this is how she wants to assert herself. So I don't have a problem with it, really, at the end of the day. Ganja Burns is this beautiful, melodic, but yet also very powerful rap-driven pop song. And it does give me a lot of shades of Pink Print. There's a lot of that emotional, soulful delivery that she delivers in the raps and in her vocalizations that you really feel someone who's been hurt and someone who's trying to overcome, which is something she hit a lot more in her first two releases, which is something I just love, that vulnerability, that emotional outpour that comes through. And there's a very hopeful, you know, in the rhythm and in the instrumental, there's a very hopeful kind of overarching theme of resilience and also getting over someone who really hurt you and who really made you had to reevaluate your life. You know, she sings, I had to abstain from sex, I had to zen my body, I had to take a hiatus, basically. I had to, she went off of Instagram for 4 months to work on this album, to perfect it, to tune into herself a little bit more. And of course, ganja being weed, it's about, you know, it's not necessarily about promoting drug use. It's about, you know, some people use that to get in tune with themselves. I don't have a problem with people doing weed. I don't do it personally. I find I can do it in a non-drug related way. I can have the same sort of highs and experiences. But for some people, it is their tool that they use, and it can be a tool. It can be a very positive, creative, driving thing. You just do need to realize that there is ways around, you know, drugs to get to those places as well. I think it's important to try and experiment with, you know, getting high without drugs occasionally, but, you know, that's another topic. So in love with Ganja Burns. Those melodies, the visuals for the music video, so beautiful. Majesty is a Labyrinth track, which I'm not familiar with Labyrinth. I'd never heard his music before, but it features Eminem, and it has this very kind of derivative keyboard percussion that I'm not crazy about. It reminds me of this band Fun that was big like several years ago. I don't know why, it just has that pop feel to it. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm talking about, but that band Fun, if you remember them, like it reminds me of that. But regardless of the chorus and Labyrinth's vocals, I'm not crazy about it. It's fine. It's just not something I'm that interested in. Nicki really changes it up by going really hardcore, rapping over a very hardcore electronic beat. So this song is very electronic. And then at the end, she sort of fades it out into some psychedelia. She says, jealousy is a disease, die slow. Very, very poignant to point that out. Now, Eminem's rap is a complete roller coaster, and should we really be expecting anything less? I will admit that the one thing I am very disappointed about on this record are the features, and I was kind of hoping that we would get like a Lauryn Hill feature. I also would have loved to have seen a Jay-Z feature or a Kendrick Lamar feature. Eminem's the only artist that's featured on this record that I actually felt stepped up to the table and actually matched Nicki's skill in terms of the delivery or the rap. That's the only song where the features work. All the other features on this record really fall flat, and Nicki outshines them by a million miles. And that's really upsetting because on the Pink Print, there were some amazing features. I was really into them. And it just is a shame that she sort of squandered that opportunity. But I also do wish she'd gotten some better artists for some of the other features on this record. But anyway, then we have Barbie Dreams. Now, of course, tons of people are talking about this track. This is a complete rip-off of, well, not rip-off in a bad way. It's an homage to the Biggie Smalls track, which obviously samples the riff there, which was a Tracy Chapman sample, which was a reason why this album was getting entangled in the first place and possibly not released on time. And in that era, Biggie Smalls made a song where he was dissing a lot of male, you know, he was doing a similar sort of diss trail, sort of like a comedy roast. And so Nicki takes that and puts it into the present day. And so she goes off and she just, no holds barred, talks about all the male rappers that we were all familiar with. Meek Mill, DJ Khaled, Drake, 50 Cent, Lil Uzi Vert. Now, I'm not going to say I don't know half the dirt on a lot of these artists. I'm not following hip-hop like that. But the DJ Khaled line definitely made me cackle. I thought that was quite appropriate, even though I know she's good friends with him, and I do think DJ Khaled probably thought it as a joke, as she does say, I'm just playing, but I'm saying. It was really poignant to put that in there, so that was really good. So I think that it was a clever way to make a track that was just feisty and fun, and ultimately I think it pays off really well. And then at the end, we get the return of Roman. Now, I did kind of say that I wasn't as crazy about Roman Reloaded, but I'll give Nicki this. The creation of that character, that alter ego, with the accent was actually quite ingenious, and I really lament that she doesn't really bring that back so much. I appreciate that she stripped things back and she's a little bit more emotionally vulnerable, but I do like the facade and the characters and the theatrics. So I love how the song picks up speed at the end and she just devolves into Roman craziness. And I think that's just a lovely sort of Easter egg for fans of her older music. I'm so glad she'd included that in there. Okay, so now we get to a portion of the album where I think things start to go a little bit downhill. There's a portion of the record I'm not so crazy about, and it's pretty much the middle section. Rich Sex was released back in June featuring Lil Wayne. I knew Lil Wayne was going to be featured. He's always featured on our albums. This is probably my least favorite song on this record. I mean, it's the kind of hip-hop I'm just not really into, and then also the subject matter. I understand there's a level of like cheek and wittiness to this, but I just can't get behind the, capitalist sort of mindset that this song embodies, which is, there's no such thing as someone who's broke and handsome. It's like, come on, like, let's not be that materialistic and shallow. But then again, she has a song called Money on her first record, and she is a rapper, and she's in that scene, and that's just part and parcel of the game. And whether it's genuine or not, I don't really care. It's not a song I keep coming back to. It is what it is. I'm not a fan. Hard White is very similar to Rich Sex. It has that classic New York instrumental that I do think is very old school, and I like that she's trying to bring that old school hip hop back again. Like I said, no more mumble rapping over trap beats. Like, there's very little trap on this record except for a few songs. And I do appreciate that. Hard White, speaking about just how much she's had to grind to get her success. Then we have Bed featuring Ariana Grande. I never made a video about this song when it was released, and that was just because I was underwhelmed by it. Is it terrible? No. Ariana's vocals just feel very muffled. I feel like someone just tried to make her not sing so powerfully, and I feel like she doesn't deliver the way she could have. And I also just think the song is kind of basic in sound. It's not terrible though. I listened to it. It's a fun summer tropical song. And it's innocent, and I don't mind it, but it kind of is just there. I definitely will listen to it. It's not a skip on this record like Rich Sex is. Rich Sex is definitely a skip in my opinion. But of course she had to feature Ariana because, Ariana and Nicki are like this inseparable pop duo now. As Nicki is also featured on her upcoming album Sweetener, and they've both been on each other's previous albums, so it was inevitable. The music video was a little bit lazy. I don't know, didn't really do much. Thought I Knew You featuring The Weeknd. I guess I was being a little unfair when I said all the other features were a letdown, because I actually think that The Weeknd is probably the highlight of this song. I do love the instrumental and the beat. It's almost trap, but it's not quite, so I really do appreciate it. It's got this very shimmery gloss to it. And The Weeknd's vocals are quite beautiful. Abel has a beautiful voice. I'm slowly falling more in love with his music, and I do love the feature between them. I think they're a good pairing, but I think that Nicki's delivery could have been a little bit more cohesive and melodic. I do think the stunted delivery gets a little bit grating after a while with the it's a little bit stunted, I guess is the best way to put it. And also, the beat is not on syncopation with the song, so it's a little bit hard to get your bearings with a song like this. But it has its moments. I don't know. It has its moments. The Weeknd's vocals definitely being a highlight. Okay, so Run and Hide is another skip on this album, and it's not because it's vapid like Rich Sex is. It's just because it's boring. This song is very short, and it is just this morphed synthesizer sample, and Nicki's this is unfortunately, the one element where she doesn't feel animated. She feels a little bit tired in her delivery, as she sort of sing raps through this song. And although I can appreciate, there's that cautious vulnerability coming through in her lyrics as she's discussing her fears and insecurities, it just doesn't come across as, because it's so down tempo and it is so minimalist. It just doesn't really capture the imagination in the same way. And it's unfortunate because it's not that I want Nicki to always be high octane. I don't think an artist like her should be forced into that sort of category all the time to be taken seriously. But I just think that she is missing the elements that makes it worth listening to her lyrics for. I mean, I can't even tell you what she's saying in that song because it's just not something you're listening for. You just sort of go on autopilot and you just sort of forget it's on. And it's one of those songs, I don't know, there's a lot of rap that does that. It just sort of autopilots, and I feel like that's what Run and Hide is doing. It's the one other big skip on this record for me. Chun-Li featuring Sway Lee. Now, I've heard a lot of people come for Sway Lee's vocals on this song. I'm not familiar with Sway Lee too much. I've heard some of his stuff, and I don't think his vocals are actually as bad as people make them out to be. I think he has this interesting delivery that is off-putting and it is offbeat, but I don't know, there is something. Now, this is a trap song. I mean, that bass is very trap. But you know what? It's infectious, and I actually fell in love with it on first listen. I do think that Nicki kind of keeps the engine going on this song more, and I do think that there are too many refrains of Sway Lee's sort of very spaced out, sort of drawn out cadences, because he's not really present. He does sound like he's completely tripped out on a ton of drugs, and I know that's his aesthetic, and I know that's the aesthetic of a lot of rappers who also sing. But there is also something just a little bit alluring about his voice. I don't know what it is, but his falsettos are kind of nice, and they kind of go with the icy production. So I'm actually not completely against the feature here, and though I do think it's definitely dragged on for too long. This is a 6-minute track, and towards the end, it just basically turns into a credit shout out where she's thanking, you know, everyone on the album. You know how there's always a credit booklet? Well, since this album hasn't been released physically yet, she basically had to do it in the actual album itself. And I thought that was cute, but it also is like a bit of a cop out to just fill space. But I do enjoy Chun-Li. It definitely has that Eastern instrumental, which I saw a bit of in the Pink print, and I love. There's something vaguely Eastern about a lot of the tones and flavors of this record, and I love that, imagery-wise and sonically. Chun-Li, I have made a review of this song. This is an iconic opening single for this record. I'm in love with it. I don't know what else to say. It is a classic, very 90s feeling power rap song. I mean, it's just all about channeling that energy, and it also has, at the same time, like a very kind of tribal, ethnic flair to it with the gong incorporated, and I don't know, I find the instrumental and everything to just be very well done. I don't have a problem with this song. I think it's classic Nicki, and it's one of her best singles she's ever released. And it picks the tempo back up because we were getting a little bit slowed down. LLC, oh boy. So people who wanted the old Nicki will definitely like LLC. It's very classic witty lyricism, fast delivery, very well syncopated. She is beautifully on beat, just exquisite. And I mean, the shade, the fashion references, it's everything you would expect in a classic Nicki Minaj song. I've seen a lot of people say great things about it. It has an amazing, infectious beat. That's also very minimalist, but it works in the way that Run and Hag didn't work. I love this track. I'm not entirely sure what LLC stands for, though. Could someone please in the comments elucidate? Because I remember LLC as being a living learning community in college. And I can't get that out of my head when I hear this song. It's like, I'm in an LLC. And then I thought it might have something to do with LL Cool J, like LLC, but then wouldn't that be LLCJ? So I'm a little bit confused. If anyone knows in the comments, let me know. Good Form. This was a song that was apparently teased in a Mercedes-Benz commercial. This has a very actually kind of basic percussion that drives it. It's very fast-paced. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. Honestly, I know some people love it. I just think it's a little bit one flavor, and I would love to see it morph a little bit more in terms of the sonics. It's very up-tempo, and I like that, and I like that energy that she's bringing. Like, the wordplay is witty, the puns are great, but I'm not entirely sold on any sort of meaning that I can derive from it. And I don't know, maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but it's over time like a song I could get a little sick of. And I don't know if that's just because maybe sonically there's not a lot going on. Like, the raps are great, but what's going on in the background is ultimately just this very repetitive percussion that's not really going anywhere. Nip Tuck. This is a song that borders a little bit more on the pop side that we saw a lot more on the Pink print. It's like a pop, hip-hop, R&B blend. She never really gets that R&B. I did hear someone say, and this is a very good point about her singing, that her singing is very pop. It is not R&B or soulful in any way. And I know that's why a lot of like real hip-hop fans are not crazy about her singing, because a lot of hip-hop artists do sing occasionally, and it's more R&B. But this song, I actually think she is trying to bridge into that world just a little bit more. There is some, you know, effects used on her voice that makes her sound very edited, and I'm not in love with it. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like there is just something a little off about this song. It doesn't really have like a refrain or a chorus, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's nothing really memorable about it. And there isn't like any sort of emotional swell. It is just sort of like it's as if it's the same problem with Good Form. Like it's just the same sort of tempo and percussion, but this time she's trying to sing slash rap, and it's just not really going anywhere for me. So again, Nip Tuck and Good Form, they're not skips and they're not terrible, but they're just sort of not crazy about them. So we have the interlude Too Lit, Too Late. This is a very playful, again, classic Nicki, where she's getting that sort of Barbie doll voice aesthetic, where she is playing the innocent, you know, talking about, oh, how could this relationship have ended? Well, let me tell you how. I think the song could have been expanded. It's a beautiful little cute interlude. Come See About Me, pure pop Nicki. You know what? I'm completely here for it. Like I said, classic hip-hop fans who like R&B vocals will not like this song. I heard one person actually say it's almost a bit country in her delivery. I'm not sure if that might be a bit of a reach, but I mean, she made the point of like Taylor Swift could have sung this song. It's not something that's very hip-hop. And that is Nicki Pop. You know, she's not a R&B soulful pop singer. She does sound a lot like Taylor Swift or Katy Perry when she goes into these pop hooks. But you know what? There is something about her voice, especially when she reaches into that lower part of her register and she really allows her voice to sing. I think that's when her voice shines. When she is singing a little softly, I think you can hear the fact that she's not a classically trained singer pretty easily. Like, there's some shaky kind of vocal portions of that song, but when she starts to build momentum and she really uses her chest and like you hear richness to her voice, it's actually quite beautiful. And I think it's a beautiful pop track. I honestly, I think it's a standout track, and I love listening to it. It just has it has that euphoric kind of pop haze over it that I love. And you know, she wanted a bit of everything on this record, just like the Pink Print. It's a cornucopia, you know, all over the place kind of stuff. So she needed a song that was just pure singing. Okay, then we go back into hip-hop territory with Sir featuring Future. This is definitely the worst feature. Feature. Easy to get them mixed up. This is definitely the worst feature on this record. His feature, throw it out the window. He is not doing anything. It's like, are you even awake? What are you even doing? We cannot understand a word you're saying. I will say Nicki's delivery is definitely much more interesting. I think it's a very clever, you know, the way she uses the word sir to attach to other words like and sir. You know, I think that's really clever. And I love that sort of wordplay that artists do. MIA does that a lot. And actually, I'm really here for the instrumental. A lot of people say it's a very Future sounding song. I'm not familiar with his music, but I definitely hear that sort of trippy kind of chilled out vibe to it, but it definitely has that Eastern flair. I love that. There's something very Chinese sounding about this instrumental. And the chime work, I really here for these instrumentals. I think the production is just flawless on this album, and maybe I haven't talked about it enough, but the producers that she's working with, quite a few, are phenomenal and very talented. Miami. Again, not really a lot to say about this song. It's sort of just there. It's fun. It's a good sort of like getting ready to go to a party kind of track. I don't know what else to really say. It's not really my kind of music. Like it's got the Barbie kind of aesthetic going on. You know, she's that animated cartoonish character, I think, in a beautiful way, in her full-fledged glory, and I do appreciate that. And it's a very classic Nicki Minaj song, I think. That's not much else I can say. Coco Chanel featuring Foxy Brown. And I'm going to just add that this ties into Inspiration's outro. They're basically one song. The only thing is she wanted Inspiration's outro to be separate because that song was purely about referencing Jamaican and Trinidadian dancehall and soca artists. And then the Coco Chanel was more like all over the place. Now, I may have to go on Genius for the lyrics here because I have no clue what the heck is being said on this track. But let's just point this out that I did love one song on the Pink Print, which was Trinidad Girls. I loved the Caribbean flair that song had. And this song is probably the most Caribbean sounding on the record. And I was definitely here for that. It's just got an infectious beat and rhythm that is just like, it's probably the most twerk-worthy song on this album. I know, I said that word on this channel. What has this channel devolved into? I think she's referencing Sting when she says, and it goes sting, sting, but I'm not talking about the guy who goes sing, sing. It's kind of like, what are we talking about? Yeah, it's a crazy roller coaster of a track. Now, again, this is a classic example of the feature messing it all up. Foxy Brown, who is an iconic rapper, definitely like a good pairing for Nicki, completely loses the plot with her verse. I don't know what the point is or if it was intentional, but she does not ride the beat well at all. And it just basically derails and also becomes completely unintelligible. I get that they're also trying to go to be a little bit bizarre and extra. It's one of those Caribbean music in its own thing. Let's just put it that way. And I'm okay with that. But when the rhythm is just so hijacked, I find that like upsetting. Like, come on, Foxy, like you could have done so much better. I'm really disappointed. So that is a real unfortunate hiccup for this song. It's actually getting worse the more I listen to it because it really ruins the flow. Not to mention her vocals don't really feel loud enough, so you can't really understand what she's saying to begin with. She feels very like, I mean, if Nicki has a problem with the mixing on this record, she should be looking at Foxy's part, because I think her vocals need to be brought up a little bit more because they are very poorly mixed into the background. But yeah, like I said, the outro is a great sort of just continuation of it, but maybe I wish she did a little bit more with it. But it's a 19-song album, so you know, we're cutting some corners here. The album's pretty long, and when you finish listening to it, you feel physically exhausted. It's a lot to take in. It is a lot of Nicki. And that's a good thing. We were highly anticipating this record, and all in all, I think it is a phenomenal piece of work. I will just add, I believe Barbie Tings is honorary track number 20, so when I listen to the album, I add horrifically jaded and left out Barbie Tings. I love that song, Justice for Barbie Tings. It should have been on this album. I almost think it's almost better than Chun-Li, and I love Chun-Li. So Barbie Tings is a great closer because I feel like it's very like a thesis statement to some extent. And it ends on like positive kind of poppy energy, so I like that. It punctuates the album well, whereas like the Coco Chanel kind of just fades out and then it's like kind of, that's it. I feel like Barbie Tings is good as like track 20, so add it, people. It's the honorary track 20. Then you really have a full-length album here. And overall, it is one I am very impressed with. Yes, there are duds, but trust me, there were duds on the Pink Print too. There were songs I was like, You know, is this album better than the Pink Print? That's a tricky thing for me to say, because there is something about some of the iconic pop songs on the Pink Print that I just keep coming back to. I think in terms of rap delivery, this album excels, and I think in terms of production, this album is definitely in a good direction, but I do think in terms of like overall cohesion and just like the features and everything being more iconic, more pop iconic moments, I do feel like the Pink Print still stands on its own 2 feet a little bit above the Queen album, but you know, the Queen album is still young, so we'll see with time like how they really go head to head with each other. But overall, I think it is a really solid return for Nicki. I was really worried. The rollout was a little bit messy, I'm not gonna lie. She kind of sabotaged herself a little bit, which is unfortunate. There was a lot of pushbacks and stuff. A very solid record, and I think it'll satisfy a lot of fans from different areas, even people who aren't so into hip-hop but just appreciate Nicki for her artistry like I do. I think she's a very clever lyricist and songwriter, and I think the producers on this album are doing an amazing job. I think it's a, worthwhile album to check out, even if you're not that into hip-hop. Some of it will make you roll your eyes, but you just have to take it as a grain of salt. So let me know in the comments what you thought about this record, and I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and check out my print review if you haven't. I'll link it in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.